Week 9 is officially here, and today I got you guys covered with my top 36 wide receivers in the tier list format I bring you guys every single week, going through my wide receiver 1s, my wide receiver 2s, my wide receiver 3s, and my favorite flex plays for fantasy football in Week 9. But before we get into the official top 36, we look at the will they play tier. Again, general rule of thumb, we want to be seeing positive reports this weekend entering Sunday slate, and if not, make sure you have a good pivot option. And we start off with Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's currently listed as a game time decision with his chest injury, but if you've been following the trend all week, it initially sounded like he would be week to week with his chest injury. Now it does sound optimistic that he could play. Doug Peterson says that he does expect him to play on Sunday, even if he is at less than 100%. Dr. Jesse Morris does say that there is a good chance Brian Thomas Jr. will play, and if he does suit up in this matchup, he is a top 12 to 15 wide receiver in my rankings. Again, a little bit risky with the chest injury, but Brian Thomas Jr., when he is healthy and on the field, needs to be in your fantasy football lineups based off the evidence we have seen all year. And moving on to a less optimistic player, we have T. Higgins dealing with that quad injury. He is listed as doubtful for this game, and it does not sound like he's going to be playing. Now, it is very unfortunate. It's the same injury that he missed last week's game with. And with T. Higgins, I mean, we know what he is. When he's fully healthy, he's a top 24, top 25 level wide receiver in fantasy, but this has basically been the summary of his career where he shows when he's healthy, he's a stud, but he just is not available for your fantasy football teams. Again, sounds like he's going to be out for this game. If he does play, top 30 level expectation, but it's very concerning that he's still dealing with this quad injury after entering the year with a hamstring injury. Next up, Amari Cooper of the Buffalo Bills. He's listed as a game time decision with the wrist injury he suffered against the Seattle Seahawks, and there's been really no clear information about his injury status from the Buffalo Bills. And while I do expect him to play in this game, it could be a case where maybe he's in partial snaps, maybe he's used as a decoy, isn't full 100%. So with Amari Cooper, again, if you do have a strong pivot option, I would actually lean that way this week. And if Amari Cooper does suit up, I have top 30 to 35 level expectations. Again, we'll talk about some of his teammates later on, but Buffalo is loaded at the wide receiver spot at this point. And finally, I do have to talk about this, but Michael Pittman Jr. of the Indianapolis Colts, I am very concerned about a Michael Pittman Jr. And technically speaking, this back injury is one that he's played through in the past. But if you've been watching the Colts games, Michael Pittman Jr. just simply has not looked like himself. So if you do have Michael Pittman Jr., again, he should probably suit up in this game. But is he entering my starting lineup with how he's looked? Absolutely not. So if you have Pittman, I would leave him on the bench regardless, and it does sound like it's a question mark whether he does play or not. But now let's move on to the official top 12 wide receivers, starting off with my wide receivers 1 and 8 respectively. CeeDee Lamb of my beloved Dallas Cowboys facing off against Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons this week. Falcons imply for 27.25 in this matchup. The Cowboys imply for 24.25 on the road. And this is the single best game environment of the week. It has the highest over-under and has the highest projected pace of the entirety of the slate. And the Sharps are hammering the over in this matchup. And starting off with CeeDee Lamb, he finally had his monster game against the San Francisco 49ers this past week. 13 receptions, 146 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns, en route to over 39 fantasy points. This is exactly what we wanted to see. We wanted to see that chemistry between him and Dak like we saw in the back half of last year, where CeeDee Lamb was averaging 28 points per game in fantasy football. So if CeeDee Lamb's looking like this, if Dak Prescott and him can continue building that chemistry, I think he has the opportunity to sun run as the wide receiver 1 overall rest of the season. And I do think that continues this week against Atlanta. And while he is expected to see shadow coverage from AJ Terrell, when Lamb's hot, when Lamb is on his game, there is not a single cornerback in the NFL that can defend him, and there's not a single cornerback in the NFL that can defend the chemistry that he has with Dak. So this is really just me buying into that chemistry with him and Dak, seeing the big game that he had against San Francisco, and projecting moving forward in a great game environment, he's able to continue what he showed on the field. I think the same applies for Drake London. Again, obviously on the flip side of a smash game environment, I already mentioned the high over-under, mentioned the overall pace of play. Cowboys defense is decimated. They're without their top 4 edge rushers for this game. Trayvon Diggs apparently is dealing with a calf tear according to Jerry Jones. Deron Bland's already been ruled out. This profiles to be a smash spot for both sides. We already talked about the Cowboys projection. Well, the Falcons against this Cowboys defense could very well put up 30 to 35 plus points on the day, and London has taken that step up, and I think he's established himself as a top 10 guy rest of the season. Number 2 is Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. Big time Sunday night football game going up against the Indianapolis Colts. The Vikings are implied for 26 points in this matchup, and with Justin Jefferson, he has been a top 20 wide receiver each and every week this year. And like I mentioned, very smash spot against this Indianapolis Colts secondary. Top 10 matchup for opposing wide receivers. And while Jettis hasn't quite had that 30-plus point performance, I am expecting it to come this week. The Vikings have lost their last 2 games. They need to keep pace in a competitive NFC North, and the best way to get back on track is feeding their superstar wide receiver. Number 3 is A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles, another superstar wide receiver, very loaded at the top here. He goes up against the Jacksonville Jaguars at home, 26.5 implied Eagles points this week. When you're looking at A.J. Brown's season, you could very well make the case that he should be number 1 overall this week. 36% seasonal target share, nearly 20 PPR points per game, and now gets a matchup against the single worst defense at stopping opposing wide receivers. The Eagles game environment is very nice. They are without Dallas Goedert for another week, and as we have seen in the last few when Dallas Goedert has been off the field, this is a very concentrated target share. We know A.J. Brown's going to get his. We know Devontae Smith, like I'll talk about in a bit, is going to get his in this offense. And with how well this Eagles offense has been playing, good luck to you guys out there who are playing against number 11 this week. Number 4 is Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. T. Higgins, like I mentioned, is listed as doubtful in this game, and Chase is already the current wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. He's done it on a 24% seasonal target share, and that could very well shoot up to the high 20s, maybe even low 30s without Higgins in the lineup. T. Higgins this year has commanded a 29% seasonal target share, so without him in the lineup, we could see Jamar Chase take on even more volume. And with Jamar Chase since week 3, he's averaged over 23 PPR points per game, and the Bengals passing offense has looked absolutely on fire. Good matchup this week against the Raiders. Obviously, you're starting him with confidence. And like I said, I think any of these top 4 guys are vying for the 1 overall spot this week. For 5 and 12, respectively, for me are Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions and Jaden Reed of the Green Bay Packers. The Lions are currently 3-point favorites in this game, and this sets up to be one of the best games of the weekend. I'll start off with Amon-Ra St. Brown. There's no Jameson Williams, of course, in the lineup with his suspension, and I'm expecting the Lions to be forced to stretch the field in the passing game this week after not having to do so at all last week against the Tennessee Titans. Fun fact in that game, they only threw the ball 15 times, only passed the ball for 52 passing yards. That is not going to be the case against a big step up in competition with Green Bay. And Amon-Ra St. Brown in a non-game script affected matchup has the opportunity to smash. He has 20 plus PPR points in 4 of his 7 games this year, and he has 28% of the Lions' targets. If this game goes down to the end, we can see Amon-Ra St. Brown absolutely dominate. And for Jaden Reed, obviously this is assuming that Jordan Love does suit up. It does sound like he will play in this game, but obviously monitor that status. If Jordan Love plays, I think Reed is a strong wide receiver 1 and a big-time bounce-back candidate. He's had a couple off weeks in a row, but we know what his bottom-line ceiling is. He's been the wide receiver 1 in fantasy in multiple weeks, and he has the opportunity. He's electric with the ball in his hands. He stretches the field, where if Jordan Love looks fully healthy, Jaden Reed has the opportunity to be the 1 overall this week. Again, a little bit more volatile than some of the other top options, but I think we have to consider him a top 12 wide receiver in the rankings based off the ceiling he presents. Number 6 for me is Malik Nabers of the New York Giants. 20 implied Giants points at home against Washington this week. Same Washington defense he carved up in week 2. 10 catches, 127 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown in that game. Malik Nabers has commanded a 37% seasonal target share for the Giants this year. So despite the fact that it's a mediocre team total at 20 this week, despite the fact that he hasn't had blow-up games in his last 2, I think this is the get-right spot for Malik Nabers. Giants offense actually functioned well against Pittsburgh, even without Andrew Thomas, and that was the big concern. With no Andrew Thomas, would they be able to hold up front against Pittsburgh? And they held up pretty well. So with Malik Nabers, again, he hasn't had the big game in the last couple of weeks since returning from the concussion, but I think we get week 2 to 4 level Nabers, where he was a 25 PPR point per game scorer, and people were talking about him as maybe the best wide receiver in the league. I think he gets back up to the level, hence why I expect him as my wide receiver 6 this week. Wide receivers 7 and 10 respectively for me are Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams. Very, very good game environment with 24.25 implied Rams points this week. And the reason why I do slightly prefer Kupp is that obviously coming into this week, Puka Nacua re-aggravates that injury in practice on Thursday. Something to monitor. Again, it does sound like he will be fully healthy, which is why he's in this section and not the will they play section. But because he is dealing with that injury, I do expect Cooper Kupp, again, it's a 1A, 1B situation for a reason, to have the better performance in this game. Again, I view these guys as very interchangeable, but regardless, both share the fact that this is a smash game environment. The Seahawks have been very vulnerable against the pass in recent weeks, and I do expect this Rams offense to score in bunches. They're fully healthy now with these 2 wide receivers on this field. With Matt Stafford on the field, the Rams project as a top 5 to 10 offense weekly, hence why the implied total is so high. Number 9 is Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins, 21.25 implied Dolphins points on the road against Buffalo this week. And he looked like the guy that we all ranked as a top 3 pick coming into the year last week. And he's averaged 19.6 PPR points per game in the 2 games he's played with Tua Tagovailoa on the field. Exactly what we expected coming into the year. Obviously, Tua, another game under his belt, recovering from that concussion. And I do think this is a sneaky, high-scoring game environment. Buffalo can definitely put the pressure up front, but I do expect Tyreek Hill, arguably the wide receiver one in terms of real-life talent, to get back on track and have another monster performance. Again, not quite as strong of a profile as some of the other guys in this range, but because of the upside, you have to consider him a top 10 guy. My wide receiver 11 was Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets, and congratulations if you did start Wilson on Thursday Night Football, because 10 targets, 9 receptions, 90 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. He scored 30 PPR points. There's a very real possibility he is the wide receiver one overall on the slate with that 30-point total. And if you did start him in your lineup, you are off to a great start in your matchup. But you guys need to start these guys, like I mentioned up top. We'll be spending some more time in the wide receivers 13 to 36 area. But if you guys want all of our rankings, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, full top 60 list over there, and tight ends, there's one of 2 ways to access our weekly rankings manifesto, the #1 resource for your fantasy football leagues this year. First way, Underdog Fantasy, promo code FSE. If you guys sign up and first deposit at least $10, make one play on the site, you will have access to our weekly rankings manifesto moving forward. The other way is by going over to flockfantasy.com. If you guys use promo code FSC on sign up, you will get access to 30% off any site-wide package, as well as a 7-day free trial on the site. Appreciate you guys for that consistent support. Again, the #1 resource for your fantasy football leagues this year. But moving on to my wide receiver 13, we have Devontae Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles. Like I mentioned with A.J. Brown hosting the Jacksonville Jaguars this week, and this is a fantastic game environment. Very consolidated target hierarchy with no Goddard on the field. Devontae Smith has been playing extremely good football. And like I said, 32nd of 32 teams is where the Jags rank against opposing wide receivers. You are firing up Devontae Smith with top 15 level confidence this week. Number 14 is Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. 25.25 implied Saints points on the road against the Panthers this week. And he garnered 36% of the team targets last week and had 14 overall in his return to the lineup after his concussion. We are expecting Derek Carr to return this week. The thesis for Chris Olave entering this year is that he would be a hyper target on a bad offense, and without Rashid Shaheed in the lineup, he could very well be a hyper target on what could be an improving offense with Derek Carr moving forward. I think he's here to stay in the top 15 to 20 range moving forward. And wide receivers 15 and 17 actually face off this week. At 15, I have DJ Moore. At 17, I have Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals. Chicago traveling on the road to play Arizona this week. Starting off with DJ Moore, again, he's been disappointing these last couple of weeks, and overall in the season, he's only the wide receiver 26. But again, he does have a 25% seasonal target share, and I expect this offense to scale up moving forward. Advantageous matchup against Arizona, and we've seen Moore possess elite weekly ceiling. Again, a little bit of a downward trajectory right now. I think he has the opportunity to really smash in the next few weeks. And on the flip side for Marvin Harrison Jr., we saw him bounce back in a big way in week 8. Over 20 PPR points, and he's gone over a 20+% target share in all but 2 games this year. But it's on Marv to string together some consistent performances moving forward. Again, he's been a little bit volatile, but I do think he settles in, and I do think he becomes a high-end wide receiver 2 or better moving forward. This is a tough matchup, but again, the volume, the talent, the offensive prowess make him a strong wide receiver 2 start for the time being, with wide receiver 1 implied upside if he consistently plays like this. Wide receiver 16 is Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. 24 implied Commanders points on the road against the Giants this week. And with Terry McLaurin, he's been a top 20 wide receiver in each of his last 6 games, and he has been a consistent wide receiver 1 for Washington this year. Now has a projected shadow matchup against Deonte Banks, who he was just benched against Pittsburgh. It was really unclear if he would even play this week, and he's really struggled across the full year. If you drafted McLaurin with confidence this summer, it's paid off with an alpha wide receiver 1 and a good offense, and I think that continues against an overmatched Giants secondary. And then wide receiver 18 is Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts. 20.5 implied Colts points on the road Sunday Night Football against the Vikings this week. And with Joe Flacco in, Josh Downs stonks are at an all-time high against a smash game environment this week. With Josh Downs, I mean, let's look at it like this. The Vikings are a pass funnel defense. This is the 5th highest over-under of the slate, and Josh Downs has been on a tear of late. He's been a top 20 wide receiver in 4 of his last 5 games, and his passing offensive splits with Joe Flacco on the field versus Anthony Richardson on the field has been night and day for Josh Downs. The Vikings defense has been gashed by big-time wide receiver performances all year, and I think Downs is the next one in line. He is the clear wide receiver 1 to trust in Indianapolis. I already mentioned at the top that I am concerned about Pittman's back injury, and I don't trust Mitchell or Pierce to command consistent targets. Josh Downs has been their wide receiver 1 since he's returned, and I expect that to continue moving forward, especially in the smash spot. But moving on to the low-end wide receiver 2s, we start off with my wide receiver 19, Darnell Mooney, another wide receiver in that matchup I mentioned with Lamb and London, the best overall game environment of the slate. But when we're looking at Darnell Mooney, he's been just much more than a situationally dependent wide receiver. In fact, he's been consistently involved each and every week this year. 22% seasonal target share, and he has been on a tear in these last couple of weeks. He's shown big-time spike week performances, 18.6, 31.5, 17.8 PPR points in 3 of his games this year. And like I mentioned, this is a very much overmatched Cowboys defense. 4 of their top edges out, 3 top corners projected out in this game. It could be a long day, and I do expect Darnell Mooney, especially the archetype of wide receiver he is, developing play-action shots, balls down the field, to really expose this Cowboys secondary this week, unfortunately. And then wide receivers 20 and 22 actually played on Thursday Night Football. Devontae Adams of the New York Jets was my 20. Tank Dell of the Houston Texans was my 22. Devontae Adams, 11 targets, 7 receptions, 91 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. Tank Dell, 9 targets, 6 receptions, 126 receiving yards. And if you had either of these guys in your lineup with wide receiver 2 expectations, you were off to a scorching start in your matchup. And wide receivers 21 and 23 respectively for me are Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins and Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills. Like I mentioned, 27.25 implied Bills points, 21.25 implied Dolphins points in this game. And Jalen Waddle, there was a reason he was on this week's buy low list. I think with Tua back, the same thesis that we had while we were drafting him in the top 3 rounds remains with Jalen Waddle moving forward. He hasn't had some big-time performances this year, unfortunately, but I do think with Tua back, the 4.2 speed, the explosive nature of this offense, we will start to see some more Jalen Waddle boom weeks moving forward, and I do think it could start this week. Buffalo is a tough matchup, but really in this game environment, we know the Bills are going to score on the other end. We know Tua with this Dolphins offense makes them viable. I do expect Jalen Waddle to have a monster performance sooner rather than later, and that could very well happen this week. And then the anti-Jalen Waddle in the sense that we know Jalen Waddle has a big-time weekly ceiling. He just hasn't played well. Khalil Shakir has been very, very damn consistent for this Bills offense. In games that he has played over 50+% of the snaps, he has been in double-digit points each and every week. I think at this point, he should be treated as the wide receiver 1 in Buffalo for fantasy. He kind of plays, that Amon St. Brown, Rashid Rice type of role, tough, middle of the field, yak target. And while he isn't the most dynamic, he's not the best separator on the team, he does create the tough yards that this Bills offense needs. Kind of fits the identity of this new age Bills offense with Joe Brady running the show. With Khalil Shakir, again, as long as he's playing that slot role, as long as he's attached to Josh Allen, I think we need to be considering him both the wide receiver 1 on the team and a top 30 weekly wide receiver. And my wide receiver 24 this week is Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens, home game against the Denver Broncos this week, where the Ravens are implied for 28 points. And it's extremely tough matchup knowing the context. He will be shadowed by Pat Surtain, but he is the number 1 overall target on this Ravens offense. Again, I have to drop him a little bit because Pat Surtain is an absolute beast on the field. But with that being said, strong offensive insulation, 27% target share. The other real caveat that I do see, though, is how does Deontay Johnson affect his overall target hierarchy? I don't expect Deontay Johnson to go out there and be the wide receiver 1 for the Ravens, but if he could be a 1B or a strong 2 to Zay Flowers, does Zay Flowers continually get a 27+% target share? That is where I say no. I think this could very well be a 1A, 1B situation where, Zay Flowers had about, 23 to 24% of the targets, and Deontay Johnson is up there at the 18 to 21% range, which is really concerning. Again, the game environment isn't already great to begin with. Pat Surtain is a bad man on the other side, and despite a strong implied total, I am concerned for Zay Flowers because like we've seen in the past, if they get Derrick Henry going early, if they don't have to throw the football, why test Pat Surtain? Why not lean on Derrick Henry in the ground game, which makes Zay Flowers' weekly floor very low? But going on to my wide receiver 3s, we have the Kansas City duo itself. Xavier Worthy coming in at 25 for me. DeAndre Hopkins coming in at 27. 27.5 implied Chiefs points at home against Tampa this week. And this is a smash game environment for the Chiefs this week against Tampa that has quite simply not been able to stop the pass in recent weeks. This is a completely different archetype situation between Worthy and Hopkins, where on one hand with Worthy, I think he's got the speed, the ability to get in behind to really impact this matchup on any given target, whereas Hopkins, he profiles more in that Rashid Rice, Juju before he got hurt role, where he's going to play that middle of the field, tough yak type of player in this Reed offense. The reason why I do prefer Worthy in this specific matchup, though, is that the Bucs have shown they have given up big plays this year. And while we haven't quite seen Mahomes and Worthy connect on a consistent basis, we've seen a lot of empty calories left on the field. slightly missing on their connection. I do think against Tampa this week, this could be one of the high-end worthy games. He's quietly commanded 32% and 24% of the targets in back-to-back weeks, and maybe this is the game he truly breaks out in. With Hopkins, this is all depending on the usage because we only saw him play 30% of the snaps last week, but he did garner a 21% target per route run rate. It fully depends on his usage. If he gets up to, 70 plus, 80 plus % of the snaps, maybe it'll look foolish that I had Worthy over him in a week's time. However, because he's more of a concern with his usage, because I do think Worthy has a strong matchup, I would actually prefer Worthy of the Chiefs wide receivers at least this week. And then wide receivers 26 and 29 for me are Ladd McConkey of the Chargers and Cedric Tillman of the Cleveland Browns. Big time game, Chargers traveling to Cleveland this week. Chargers, obviously this feisty, tough offense developed by Jim Harbaugh, and the Cleveland Browns coming off a big-time upset against Baltimore last week. We'll start off with Ladd McConkey. He's been Herbert's wide receiver 1 this year, and he commands 24% of the Chargers' targets. And quietly out of the bye, the Chargers have actually thrown the ball more. Each game since the bye, they have thrown the ball over 30 times. Prior to the bye, they had no single game with over 30 passing attempts. That is a clear sign that they want to throw the football moving forward, and Ladd McConkey has been the clear beneficiary of recent weeks. I think he's got the opportunity to truly develop into a wide receiver 2 in fantasy if we continually see this team pass the ball at the rate that they have. On the flip side with Cedric Tillman, obviously he was probably the #1 waiver pickup in your leagues this week, and he looks like a current wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside moving forward with how involved he's been in this offense. 21 targets in these last 2 games, playing that big X wide receiver role for Jameis Winston. He has a ton of upside moving forward. Tougher matchup on surface level against the Chargers, but I do think Cedric Tillman, with how he's played and how much he's involved in this offense, to continue on his upward trajectory. Wide receiver 28 for me this week is Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos, the flip side of that Denver-Baltimore matchup this week. With Courtland Sutton, obviously he is volatile. He had a goose egg just 2 weeks ago, but he's shown out at times this year. But I really like what I'm seeing from Bo Nix in this Denver Broncos offense. This is a pass funnel Ravens defense, and Sutton has earned a 20+% target share in 6 of his 8 games this year. Baltimore, we know, will score on the other end, again, 28 implied points, and I think the Broncos will be able to move the ball through the air and keep this a competitive game. And then finally at 30, we have Jackson Smith and Jigba of the Seattle Seahawks, 23.25 implied Seahawks points at home against the Rams this week. And Jackson Smith and Jigba, he had 28% of the targets last week, and he is the clear wide receiver 1 in terms of volume on this offense with DK Metcalf out of the lineup. And the reason why I can't rank JSN higher is JSN himself, man. Like, I'm confident he has a high floor. He's like a Wan'Dale Robinson for this offense, but he hasn't been used down the field. He hasn't really looked that good, and again, volume alone will get him in this range, but I do think if he has a big performance this week, he is one of the biggest sell highs once DK Metcalf comes back into the fold. I view him as a low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4 the rest of the season, and I think you can sell high if he has a big week this week. I'm nervous about JSN moving forward. I don't think he's shown to be a very good football player in his 2 years, and I think we have to accept that. And then finally, rattling through my wide receivers 31 to 36. At 31, I have Keon Coleman of the Buffalo Bills. I'm hedging Coleman at 31 right now because I'm still unsure of Amari Cooper's status, but with that being said, he has looked phenomenal in his last 2 games. In the last 2 games, a 23% target share in each game, and he's come up with big plays for this Bills offense. Is he the perfect wide receiver? Absolutely not. He's not the best separator in the world. He doesn't move the best in the world, but what he does is he gives you tough yak yards, and he's able to high point the football, and given his skill set in this Bills offense working with Josh Allen, that will play. He's been a top 20 wide receiver in each of his last 2 weeks. Well, I can't quite rank him there because if Amari Cooper's healthy, he's going to get his slice of the pie. Like I mentioned with Shakir, he's been consistently involved. But Keon Coleman has a weekly ceiling that warrants him being a top 36 wide receiver each and every week, like we've seen in the last 2. And then wide receiver 32 is Romeo Doubs of the Green Bay Packers. I already mentioned his teammate with Jayden Reed, but I do think Romeo Doubs has truly separated as the wide receiver 2 on this team. In his last 3 weeks, he's looked very impressive. He's clearly developing a rapport with Jordan Love. And now that Jordan Love is expected to play in this game, he is the next guy in line after Reed that I trust in this Green Bay offense. And this is a Green Bay offense I want to be targeting in this game environment against Detroit. Romeo Doubs, credit to him. I mean, he's had in the last 3 weeks, 2 weeks as a wide receiver 1. And last week, despite Jordan Love leaving early, he was a top 40 wide receiver in fantasy. Wide receiver 33 is Jacoby Myers of the Las Vegas Raiders. 19.25 implied Raiders points this week going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. Jacoby Myers has quietly been extremely good as of recent weeks, and this is a very good game environment for him. I think he's a strong wide receiver 3 level start, 3 top 30 performances in his last 4 games, and he's garnered a 24+% target share in each of those games. And he's been underrated all year ever since the Adams trade, and I think he should be considered a top 40 wide receiver option moving forward. Wide receiver 34 is Jalen Tolbert of the Dallas Cowboys, couple down weeks in a row against the Detroit Lions and the San Francisco 49ers, but I do think this is a big-time get-right spot against Atlanta. I already mentioned the game environment, and with CeeDee Lamb seeing potentially a lot of A.J. Terrell in this game, Tolbert has the chance to be the unsung hero like he was against Pittsburgh in Week 5. He's been volatile this year, but like I said, I love the game environment for the Cowboys, and I think each team will put up a ton of points in this game. Number 35 is Calvin Ridley of the Tennessee Titans, and go figure, his 2 big monster performances this year actually happened against me in the Flock League, but all jokes aside, when he's connecting with either Mason Rudolph or Will Levis, it's looked good, but unfortunately, more often than not, it has not looked good this year. It's been a lot of empty calories, getting targets down the field, just not being able to connect. However, like I said, I just got to trust the process at this point. Obviously, he had a big game this past week. Maybe he's turned the page in terms of him playing well moving forward. Again, a riskier projection than some of these other names, but I do think he has a ton of ceiling. And then finally, closing the video, we have Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings. He's kind of the anti-Calvin Ridley because Calvin Ridley we know is involved on a week-to-week basis. We're hoping for positive regression. On the flip side with Addison, he just simply has not been involved of late. Only a 17% yearly target share, and he hasn't crossed over 20% in 4 of the 5 games he's played this year. Simply put, with Addison, we need more target involvement moving forward, and this is a potential get-right spot against Indy. Again, not very high expectations. He is a volatile play for your lineup, but he does have a ton of upside in this matchup. But either way, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below. Comment your biggest start-sit decision. I'll try to get to as many as possible. And of course, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We are on the road to 60,000 subscribers. I appreciate you guys for that continued support. And of course, if you want access to our weekly rankings moving forward, there's one of 2 ways to access them right now. Underdog Fantasy, promo code FSC. If you sign up and make a deposit of at least $10, you make 1 play on the site, you will get access to our weekly rankings each and every week. The other way is by going over to flockfantasy.com. Promo code FSC, you'll get 30% off of any site-wide package, as well as a 7-day free trial. Mentioned in the beginning of the video, want to mention it now for those of you that made it this far. But with that being said, peace out. Good luck in week 9. Let's eat those W's.